From the time we enter the world, our lives are surrounded by stories. Parents learn early on to narrate what a child's day will look like, to help them create a sequence of expectations and events. And as a child grows, we tell stories to amuse, to bond, and primarily to teach. Our family chronicles what we value. Through them, we learn what matters, how to treat others, and what it means to belong. And furthermore, stories take us beyond our own experiences to see things from another perspective, building empathy and insight. Who we are and what is expected of us emerges from the words we share. As listeners and readers, we can't help but become a part of the larger narrative. And while we are shaped by what we hear, we are also participants in its retelling, and so add our own impression and interpretation to its transmission. As stories go, this Shabbat is about as good as it gets, because the Torah is immersed in the heart of the Exodus epic, which is our people's signature story in which we move from oppression under Pharaoh toward liberation and ultimately freedom. And note I said our people's story, though it happened to our ancestors, we and all of the subsequent generations who, like Axel did moments ago, accepted the Torah, have a part in this story. Thousands of years after the event, the Haggadah ritualizes how we tell the Exodus narrative, along with insights offered by generations of commentators. The Shalom Hartman Haggadah supplement reads, "The injunction, B'chol dor vador chayav adam lir'ot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim." In every generation, each person is obligated to see themselves as if they had participated in the exodus from Egypt, is one of the most evocative lines in the Haggadah. It's a call to empathy, to feel the suffering and redemption of our ancient ancestors as our own. It's also a command to use the story to bring meaning into our own contexts as we imagine ourselves being lifted out of despair and into freedom. This is the answer to why Axel read the Torah and shared his interpretation this morning, because its ancient words matter and can help us navigate the lives we live today. The telling itself is one of God's objectives. When we tell, we teach. God says as much to Moses. The text reads, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the heart of his courtiers, in order that I might display these my signs among them, and that you may recount in the hearing of your children and your children's children how I made a mockery of the Egyptians, and how I displayed my signs among them, in order that you might know that I am the Lord." God knew that this would make a good story, and more importantly, that its message would shape the lives of countless generations. And chapters later, the portion concludes with these words which have been incorporated into the Haggadah. "And when in times to come, your child asks you, 'What does this mean?' you shall say, 'It was with a mighty hand that the Lord brought us out of Egypt, the house of bondage." Of the many lessons in this text, there are three I want to highlight this morning, which may help us navigate our current challenges. One is about hard-heartedness. The second is how a people responds when they are othered or singled out. And finally, the requirement to speak. So, Pharaoh. Here was a man who was a ruler over a vast and populous nation, a country which was rich in history, resources, and people. He lived a life of absolute power, a ruler who was viewed as an earthly embodiment of one of the Egyptian gods. That assumption of authority created a sense of entitlement, meaning it was virtually impossible for Moses, who was bearing God's message, to have an impact. Nothing could permeate or penetrate Pharaoh's sense of invincibility. So whether you read the Exodus story for the first time today or recognize it from the Passover table, the story of Pharaoh's hardened heart shouldn't come as a surprise. After all, why should he care? And that was the point. He didn't need to. Flies, locusts, water turned to blood. Pharaoh was largely insulated from the life of the average Egyptian. And yet every time Moses demanded, "Let my people go," and Pharaoh refused, God would follow up with a plague, and that seemed to have some effect. It seemed is the operative word, because as each one brought its own discomfort to the people of Egypt, Pharaoh would feel pressured by their outcry, and so seemed to relent. But once the danger had passed and the country had returned to a more normal condition and circumstances, he would begin to feel invincible once again and harden his heart. And after several interactions, this back and forth became a pattern. Here is what our sages had to say. The Eitz Chaim Torah commentary notes, Pharaoh's repeated refusals to let the slaves go have made it virtually impossible for him to change now. In effect, he's given away his own freedom to decide. Habit made him inflexible. The authoritarian that Pharaoh is has no need to change because he believes he controls the world. Every time his authority was challenged by discomfort, he doubled down, making the possibility of changing even more remote. Rabbi Menachem Creditor shares another kind of lesson that 18th century Italian rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto taught, that our external actions shape our inner world. We have more control over our actions than over our emotions. And if we were to act differently, if we were to choose differently, our inner life could follow. But the inverse is also true. Act cruelly long enough, and cruelty becomes who you are. Cruelty becomes who you are. Our second point speaks to the strength of community. Listen to our text. Pharaoh's courtiers said to him, "How long shall we let this one be a snare to us?" And here they refer to Moses, who was clearly interfering with the workings of Egyptian society. But this xenophobic comment wasn't just about Moses. It had roots in an earlier time. After Joseph's death and a new Pharaoh came to power, that king was either ignorant or indifferent to what Joseph had done for the country. It was then that the Pharaoh was able to say to his people without any pushback from them, "Look, these Israelite people are too numerous for us. Let us deal wisely with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join with our enemies in fighting against us and rise up from the ground." Fear of difference underlies this pronouncement, drawing harsher lines between Egyptians and those Israelites who had made their home in Egypt for generations, creating a distinction between those who belong and those who do not. And yet when Moses informed Pharaoh that the community needed to leave in order to worship God, Pharaoh asked, who was to stay behind? Because he reasoned that the Israelites would return to reunite with their families. Moses put a stop to that thinking then and there with this answer: all of us will go, young and old. The grammar encompasses everyone in between, sending the clear message that every member of the community was important and essential to its makeup, and that they would not be separated and no one would be left behind. And finally, I want to mention Moses, who is lovingly known to us as Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher. Moses, our teacher, who suffered from a speech impediment. And when God singled him out to confront Pharaoh and to liberate the Israelites, Moses protested, noting he was hampered by his own limitation. And yet God persisted. And as Dr. Betsy Stone notes, Moses had to find a way to overcome his own limitations, whether God-given or self-imposed. And we all know that Moses did go to Pharaoh, and he did find a way to communicate God's message. The Torah's lessons are essential if we want to ensure that we do not become the pharaohs of our day, indifferent to the suffering of others, simply because we have not been personally affected by the plagues of intolerance and xenophobia. When, as a society, we become tolerant of cruelty because it is so frequently wielded against citizens and immigrants alike, when we dismiss and excuse it as a necessary feature to ensure that a community or a city is safe when there was no apparent danger to begin with, when we distance ourselves from the people whose lives have been upended, the families who have been torn apart, the men and women and even children whose suffering has become normalized by the escalating violence and frequency with which it happens, that makes our tolerance of it grow. And this is why we read Torah. No matter what faith tradition you practice, cruelty is an abomination. Pharaoh could not break out of his own vicious cycling of hardening his heart, but we do not have to succumb to it. As Jews, we are highly sensitized to the experience of the newcomer, precisely because this is our Exodus story. We were once strangers in Egypt. Thousands of years later, we still tell this story explaining the difficulties to our children, no matter their capacity to understand or receive it. This is why. Because in every age there is a Pharaoh, and we who have experienced oppression have a responsibility to prevent it, to interrupt it, and to help those who are being crushed by it. Like Moses, who spoke even though it was deeply uncomfortable for him to do so, in the march toward freedom and justice, as citizens, may we use our voices to shape our community, our city, and our nation, even when it is difficult. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be so.